I'm Adam Hayward, Master of Arts, owner of Hayward Media Coaching Services and Narrative in Motion, and more importantly, a graduate of Waterbear, the College of Music, which I'm very, very proud of, and it's superb. I'd like to talk today about my own fresh idea, and hopefully myself and another guest today might inspire you to do the same and for you to find and develop your own innovations as well. For me, though, all innovations come from one absolute source, and kind of like a fundamental, beautiful truth is that we're there really to solve a problem. The problem for me, after spending the best part of 10 years in press areas and interviewing bands, and I began to notice certain behaviors. The more established and sort of further up the food chain types, you know, the bigger artists that I spoke to were generally more articulate, together, visibly and to the point, and some of the more so than some of the less experienced artists. This might seem obvious given the experience, but then I noticed something else, which was in both, which was a pattern that kind of emerged. It was the songwriter, vocalist, and guitarist. Great, fantastic interview, knew everything, could talk about everything, brilliant. The drummer and the bassist, they didn't really contribute or know what to say. Now, at first, for me, it became frustrating. I was like, well, you know, when you first start doing interviews, you get the drummer and you get the bass player, and often the interviews weren't as good as they could have been. So why was that? This was the problem really initially that I wanted to solve. I wanted, as a journalist, a great conversation with whoever I spoke to in the band, regardless of their role. So what was the gap? Well, at first, I assume that all bass players and drummers lack confidence to talk about the music that they're involved in. Again, why was that? Then I began to think about how we could join the dots between these amazing musicians and getting a great interview with these wonderful people. This had me sleepless for weeks, and I used my MA at the time, because this is when I was developing the business, to offer some critical thinking, to try and solve this puzzle, and came across a book, which I'm going to show you now. Fabulous, fabulous book. And Rash will be very well aware of this book, because I think it may have been Rasher initially that turned me on to this author, Nancy Duarte. Amazing, amazing person. And it's called Resonate. And I was flicking through these pages, desperately trying to find some kind of inspiration to this puzzle that I was trying to solve. And I came across a wonderful quote by the screenwriter who wrote the screenplay for The Color Purple, the amazing Steven Spielberg movie. And I guess this was like my light bulb moment. I'm going to share this quote with you now. And the quote goes, "The best way to unite an idea with an emotion is by telling a compelling story. In a story, you not only weave a lot of information into the telling, but you also arouse your listeners' emotions and energy. Any intelligent person can make lists. It takes rationality, but little creativity to design an argument using conventional rhetoric. If you can harness imagination and the principles of a well-told story, then you get people rising to their feet amid thunderous applause instead of yawning and ignoring you." This was my spark. Then I began to read further texts based on Sid Field's paradigm, which were based on the original principles of Aristotle, 3-act theory, you know, like Act 1, the setup, Act 2, confrontation, Act 3, resolution. And ultimately, as a man of a certain age, I began to think about Star Wars, almost a lot, really, which I generally do anyway. I'm a bit of a Star Wars buff. And the way that George Lucas emotionally engaged with an entire generation of people through the structure of story. With this in mind and a desire to help artists, I found how that gap could be filled, and more importantly, where it could be filled. And that was through the artist biography. And then I focused on how bios were traditionally written, and they all seemed the same. This death by Wikipedia pattern of we began then, we were from here, we play this, dull, uninspiring. And no wonder artists couldn't find the words to recall this list, because how can anyone engage, remember, or relate to what is essentially a shopping list? You write down a shopping list because you forget it. And why not write a story that you'll never forget? And more importantly, you can relate and love it. What do we do with a good story? We relate to it in some kind of way. We make an emotional connection, and we explain what it is there we're here to do. A conversation, and in the case of an artist and a band, this is a real chance here to have a conversation, possibly for the first time with their audience, but this time with the volume turned down. An opportunity to emotionally connect with their fans. Favorite quote here from Nancy: "The enemy of persuasion is obscurity." I love that quote so much. It's on my business cards. Make that message clear without the poetry, without the metaphors of lyrics, and talk one-on-one. You see your audience and they see you as an intimate moment. So when I'm creating stories with the people that I work with now, we do it in a very simplistic, almost like the Aristotle and Sid Field paradigm. Whereas we start in the present moment, right here, and we say, this is us, this is who we are, this is what we're here to sell. As in, we've got a new album out, new single, new video, whatever that product is, we're here to sell. Then what we do, and this is a very simplistic version of it, we rewind the clock back to the beginning of that period of when you began, and then we show the story of how that developed. Not like I went into the studio and we did it in 4/4 and we played an E minor and all that sort of stuff. I'm on about, what were your motivations for writing that song? Tell me about it. Why is that subject important to you? What does it mean to you? Give me an insight. And then what we do, so all of that comes there, and then we snap back right back to the center part again, because in marketing, you'll see this now and again, the product name gets mentioned in a marketing campaign. It's kind of like a punch. It's kind of like a finger point on the forehead to wake you up. And it's the same thing here in a bio. You do it again, the band, blah, 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 the album, blah, 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 the date, yada, yada, yada. And then what we do, my favorite part of the process, is we put the clock and we take it forward. And in that forward motion, where the narrative is, that's why I call it narrative in motion, because it's moving always. In that forward motion, we show people the absolute truth of what's going to happen. So a tour, something exciting, what they call a call to action. Give them something to kind of like to arouse their spirits, get them on board. And by doing all of these things, we engage them in your story. And that's how that works. The challenge, though, for me, when I first started this idea, because it's not, it's not a new idea. We've been telling stories for thousands of years, but this way that I do it now is a little bit different. And the challenge for me was, how did I get the artists to see how I was doing this, why I was doing it, what was my story, what was my rationale, why did I want to do it? That was my biggest challenge starting this business. I offered free consultations, tons of them. Some of them went on for hours, ridiculous amounts. So when Toby asked me to do this and said, you've got 10 minutes, I went, oh my goodness, this is going to be difficult. But it took me hours, and I almost felt like a walking vacuum salesman from door to door. But eventually, the first set of artists got it, and they gave me a little bit of faith. And then they told their friends, and the friends told their friends, and they came back to me to talk to me as well. And I showed them a version, like I've just showed you, in a very simplistic way, of how the process works. And they took in a nutshell, they took a leap of faith. I showed them that I could do what I showed them was what I could do to help them. And in return, in that faith, they talked about it a lot. They published their bios, and one by one, they came to work with me, and have done since. In conclusion to this, these artists are now completely invested in their stories. So now they understand their stories, even the bass player, even that person understands that story. And they're emotionally connected to it. They were there when it was written. They had the argument in the session with the guitarist saying, oh, actually, I thought that song was about that. And they go, no, it wasn't. It was about this. And then go, oh, right, okay. So all of this is going on, and we're writing all these things down, and we're getting this story together. And by the end of it, everybody in the band knows this story back to front. And more importantly, they are emotionally connected to it. So when they tell this story in an interview, they're completely confident, because often or not, confidence is a lack of knowing what to say. But if you know what to say, you're fine. The confidence is there. And ultimately, they come away with what is an incredible story. And that's pretty much what narrative emotion is about. It's about the opportunity to connect to your story, and then for your fans and the people that are following you to access that story, to access you with the volume turned down, without the music, without the mic stand, that protective barrier between you and your audience. We're going to remove that. And it's time for an open conversation. And that's pretty much it. Any questions?